The red dust swirled around Margaret Stone's boots as she walked between the empty buildings of Dry Creek. The wind howled through broken windows and opened doors that nobody bothered to close anymore. 3 years ago, this place had been home to 800 people. Now only 12 remained, and Margaret wondered how long before that number dropped to 0. She pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders and pushed against the wind toward the trading post. The building looked tired, its paint peeling and metal siding dented from countless dust storms. But it was still solid, still standing, just like Margaret herself. The bell above the door rang as she entered. The sound echoed in the empty space, where shelves once held goods from across the sector. Now most of the shelves stood bare, holding only basic supplies and emergency rations. Margaret walked behind the counter and checked the communication array that hummed quietly in the corner. Still, no word from Earth Command, still no rescue ships coming, still no sign that anyone out there remembered Dry Creek existed. Margaret sat down in the old wooden chair that Jacob had built for her during their first year on New Arizona. She could still see his hands working the wood, his smile when he presented it to her. That was before the raid started, before everything changed. She opened the supply ledger and began counting what they had left. Food would last another 6 months if everyone was careful. Water recycling systems still worked fine. Power cells were getting low, but the solar collectors still brought in some juice during the day. They could survive, but surviving was not the same as living. Outside, another gust of wind rattled the windows. Margaret looked up from her ledger and saw old Pete walking across the main street, bent over against the wind. He was heading to the greenhouse again. Pete spent most of his time there now, tending to the plants that kept them all fed. It gave him something to do, something to care about. Margaret understood that feeling. Taking care of the trading post and the communication array gave her purpose too. Every morning she checked the equipment, cleaned the connections, and sent out their daily status report to Earth Command. Every morning the message went out into space, and every morning silence came back. The door opened again, and cold air rushed, and Betty walked inside, shaking dust from her hair. Betty ran the small medical station and was the closest thing Dry Creek had to a doctor. She was also one of the few people who still talked about the future like it might actually happen. "Any word today?" Betty asked, though she already knew the answer from Margaret's expression. "Nothing," Margaret said. "Same as always." Betty nodded and walked to the small section where Margaret kept medical supplies. She picked up a bottle of pain medicine and left some credits on the counter. "Tom's back is acting up again. This weather makes everything hurt worse." Margaret made a note in her ledger. Tom was their engineer, the one who kept the power running and the water flowing. If his back got too bad to work, they would all be in trouble. "How many people came to see you this week?" Margaret asked. 5, Betty said. "All with the same thing. Dust lung, joint pain, depression. People are wearing down, Margaret. Bodies and spirits both." Margaret knew Betty was right. She could see it in everyone's faces. The hope was fading. When the first families left Dry Creek 6 months ago, people said they were smart to get out, early. When more families left after that, people said they were probably right to go. Now the ones who stayed were starting to wonder if they were fools. The communication array made a soft beeping sound. Margaret's heart jumped like it always did, hoping for a message from Earth Command. But it was just the hourly system check, the machine talking to itself. "I should go," Betty said. "This storm is getting worse." After Betty left, Margaret was alone again. She walked to the back room where she and Jacob used to live. Everything was still the same. His clothes hanging in the closet, his books on the shelf, his service pistol in the drawer next to the bed. Margaret had learned to shoot with that pistol. Jacob insisted on it after the first raid started. He said everyone on the frontier needed to know how to protect themselves. She never thought she would need the skill, but she was glad to have it now. The wind outside grew stronger, and Margaret could hear things blowing around in the street. Tomorrow she would have to go out and secure whatever had come loose. Tomorrow, she would check on the other families, make sure everyone was okay. Tomorrow she would send another message to Earth Command and wait for an answer that would never come. She was about to close the ledger when the communication array made a different sound. Not the usual beep of the system check, but a sharp buzz that meant someone was trying to reach them. Margaret ran to the machine and put on the headset. Static filled her ears, broken by fragments of voice. Human voice, speaking words she could barely understand through the interference. The signal was weak and kept cutting out, but she caught pieces of it. Command frequency 77 Alpha, requesting emergency. Margaret's hands shook as she adjusted the controls, trying to clear the signal. For 3 years, nothing. Now this. Storm interference. Coordinates unclear. Say, again, Dry Creek, do you copy? The signal faded to static, then disappeared completely. Margaret tried to respond, switching to different frequencies, but there was nothing. The storm was too strong, or the signal was too weak, or both. She sat back in her chair, heart pounding. Someone out there knew about Dry Creek. Someone was trying to reach them. After 3 years of silence, someone remembered they existed. Outside, the storm raged on. But for the first time in months, Margaret Stone felt something she had almost forgotten how to feel: hope. The storm lasted 3 days. Margaret spent most of that time at the communication array trying to pick up the signal again. She heard nothing but static and wind. By the third morning, she was starting to think she had imagined the whole thing. Then, Betty came running into the trading post, her face pale with excitement and fear. "There's a ship," Betty said, breathing hard. "Crashed about 2 miles north of here. Pete saw the smoke." Margaret grabbed Jacob's pistol from behind the counter and her medical kit from the shelf. If someone had survived the crash, they would need help. If someone had not survived, they would need to know who it was and what they were doing here. The walk to the crash site was hard. The storm had left deep drifts of red dust everywhere, and the wind still pushed at them with cold fingers. Margaret, Betty, Pete, and Tom made their way carefully across the broken ground. They found the ship wedged between 2 rock formations. It was small, built for speed rather than comfort. Military design, Margaret could tell. The hull was black and scarred, marked with burns that looked fresh. Someone had been shooting at this ship recently. "Anyone alive in there?" Tom called out. A weak voice answered from inside. "Help me." Tom and Pete worked to pry open the damaged hatch while Margaret and Betty waited with the medical supplies. When the hatch finally came free, they could see inside the dark cabin. One man sat strapped into the pilot's seat. He was unconscious, now blood on his face and hands. His clothes were military, but not the usual Earth Command uniform. This was something else. Something Margaret had seen before. "Special Forces," she said quietly. They pulled the man from the wreckage carefully. He was older than Margaret, maybe 50 years, with gray hair and scars on his arms. Built like a soldier, even unconscious. When they lifted him, Margaret saw the name on his uniform: Harper. The name hit her like a punch to the stomach. She knew that name. Jacob had talked about Commander Kyle Harper many times. His old commanding officer, his friend, the man who had trained Jacob, fought beside him, saved his life more than once. "You know him?" Betty asked, seeing the look on Margaret's face. "Jacob knew him," Margaret said. "They served together." They carried Harper back to Dry Creek and took him to Betty's medical station. Betty worked on his injuries while Margaret stood nearby, watching. Harper had been shot, she could see that much. Bullet wounds in his shoulder and leg, both treated recently but still bleeding. "He'll live," Betty said after an hour of work. "But he's been through hell. These wounds are a few days old and he's exhausted. Whatever he was running from, he's been running for a while." Harper stayed unconscious for 2 days. Margaret visited the medical station every few hours, waiting for him to wake up. She had questions that only he could answer. Why was he here? How did he know about Dry Creek? And what had happened to make him come here after all these years? On the second night, Harper opened his eyes. Margaret was sitting beside his bed reading one of Jacob's old books. She looked up when she heard him move. "Water," Harper said, his voice rough. Margaret gave him water and helped him sit up. He looked around the small medical station, taking in everything with the careful eyes of a soldier. "Where am I?" he asked. "Dry Creek," Margaret said. "New Arizona. You crashed here 3 days ago." Harper's eyes went wide. "Dry Creek? Jesus, I made it. You know this place?" Harper looked at her more carefully. "You're Margaret, Jacob's wife." "Jacob's widow," Margaret corrected. "He died 3 years ago." The pain that crossed Harper's face was real. He closed his eyes and was quiet for a long moment. "I know," he said finally. "I was there. I was his commanding officer when the Zephyrians hit the colony. Jacob died saving everyone else. He was a hero." Margaret felt tears start, but she pushed them back. She had cried enough for Jacob. Now she needed answers. "Why are you here?" she asked. Harper tried to sit up straighter and winced from his wounds. "Because I made a promise to Jacob. Before he died, he made me swear to protect something important." "What something?" "There's a facility under this settlement," Harper said. "Built before the colony was established, hidden. Jacob was assigned to guard it, but only he and I knew what was really down there." Margaret stared at him. "Under Dry Creek? That's impossible. I've lived here for 8 years. There's nothing under here except rock and dirt." "There's more than that," Harper said. "Much more, and the Zephyrians know about it now. They're coming for it." The fear in Harper's voice was real. The kind of fear that came from seeing things that would give normal people nightmares. Margaret had heard that fear before in Jacob's voice during the last weeks before he died. "What kind of facility?" she asked. Harper was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. The kind that could change everything. The kind that could save humanity or destroy it, depending on who gets their hands on it. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the windows of the medical station. Margaret thought about the radio signal she had heard, about Harper's crashed ship, about the bullet wounds in his body. "Who's coming?" she asked. "Everyone," Harper said. "Earth Command wants the facility back under their control. The Zephyrians want to destroy it or steal it. And there are others, people who would use what's down there for their own purposes." He looked directly at Margaret, and she saw the weight of years in his eyes. "Jacob died protecting this secret," Harper said. "Now it's up to us to finish what he started. But I need to know something first. Are you willing to learn the truth about what your husband really died for?" Margaret thought about the empty buildings of Dry Creek, about the 12 people who still called this place home, about the 3 years of silence from Earth Command. "Yes," she said. "I'm ready." Margaret helped Harper walk from the medical station to the trading post. His leg was still weak from the bullet wound, but he insisted he was strong enough to show her what lay beneath Dry Creek. Betty wanted him to rest another day, but Harper said they did not have time. "The Zephyrians could be here any day," Harper said as they walked slowly across the dusty street. "My ship sent out a distress signal before it crashed. They'll track it here." At the trading post, Harper went straight to the back room where Margaret and Jacob used to live. He knelt beside the old wooden bed and ran his hands along the floor. "Help me move this," Harper said. Margaret grabbed one end of the bed and they pushed it aside. Underneath was a section of floor that looked the same as the rest, but when Harper pressed his hand against it, something clicked. A hidden panel slid away, showing a metal ladder that went down into darkness. "Jacob never told you about this?" Harper asked. Margaret shook her head. She felt strange, like the ground under her feet was not solid anymore. How many other secrets had Jacob kept? From her? Harper went down the ladder first. Margaret followed, her heart beating fast. The ladder was longer than she expected, going down at least 30 feet before reaching the bottom. When her feet touched solid ground again, lights came on automatically. They were in a corridor made of metal and concrete. The walls were smooth and clean, nothing like the rough buildings above. The air smelled different down here, processed and filtered. This place had its own power supply, its own life support systems. "Welcome to Genesis Station," Harper said. They walked down the corridor, past several doors. Harper stopped at one marked Command Center and pressed his palm against a scanner beside it. The door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside was a room full of computers and monitors. Everything was dark until Harper entered a code on a keypad. Then the machines came to life, screens lighting up and showing data that Margaret could not understand. Helen, activate, Harper said to the air. A woman's voice answered from speakers in the ceiling. Commander Harper, identity confirmed. Welcome back to Genesis Station. It has been 3 years, 4 months, and 12 days since your last visit. That's the AI, Harper explained to Margaret. Human Enhancement Laboratory Emergency Network. She runs this place. Hello, Mrs. Stone, the AI said. I am sorry for your loss. Lieutenant Commander Stone was a fine officer and a good man. Margaret looked around at all the equipment, all the screens showing information she did not understand. What is this place? The Genesis Project was Earth Command's answer to the Zephyrian threat, Harper said. The aliens are stronger than us, faster than us, tougher than us. We were losing the war badly. So Earth Command decided to level the playing field. Harper walked to a large screen that showed a diagram of the human body. Different parts were highlighted in different colors. They developed a process to enhance human beings, Harper said. Make them stronger, faster, smarter. Give them abilities that would let them fight the Zephyrians on equal terms. Enhancement process has a 73% survival rate, the AI added. Subjects who survive show increased physical strength, improved reflexes, enhanced cognitive function, and extended lifespan. Margaret felt cold. Jacob was enhanced? One of the first successful subjects, Harper said. It's how he was able to fight off 30 Zephyrian soldiers when they attacked the colony. No normal human could have done that. Margaret remembered that day. She had been in the trading post when the sirens started. Jacob told her to hide in the basement while he went to fight. She never saw the battle, but she heard it. The sound of gunfire, explosions, and something else. Something that sounded like thunder. He never told me, Margaret said. He wasn't allowed to tell anyone, Harper said. The project was classified, at the highest levels. Even I wasn't supposed to know about it, but I was his commanding officer. I had to know what my people were capable of. Margaret walked to another screen that showed files on different test subjects. She saw Jacob's name along with dozens of others. Most of the files were marked with red text that said, deceased. What happened to them? She asked. Some died. During the enhancement process, Harper said. Others died in combat. The enhanced soldiers were sent to the worst battles, the places where normal humans had no chance. They saved a lot of lives, but most of them didn't survive the war. Why didn't Jacob die in the process? Genetic compatibility, the AI answered. Lieutenant Commander Stone possessed rare genetic markers that made him an ideal candidate for enhancement. The same markers are present in immediate family members. Margaret looked at Harper. Family members? That's why I'm here, Harper said. The Zephyrians are planning a massive assault on this sector. Earth Command has abandoned the outer colonies. But if the aliens get their hands on the Genesis technology, they'll use it to create enhanced biosoldiers. Humanity won't stand a chance. Harper moved to a cabinet filled with vials of blue liquid. Each vial glowed softly in the artificial light. This is the enhancement serum, Harper said. There are only 12 doses left. Earth Command ordered me to destroy the facility, but I made a different choice. I came here to offer those doses to people who could use them to protect humanity. People like me, Margaret said. Your genetic markers are almost identical to Jacob's, Harper said. You have the best chance of surviving the process. With your knowledge of this colony and enhanced abilities, you could hold off the Zephyrian assault long enough for me to get word to Earth Command. Margaret stared at the vials. The liquid inside moved slowly, like thick honey. She thought about Jacob, about the secrets he had carried, about the sacrifice he had made. What if I die? She asked. Then you die as Jacob did, Harper said. Fighting for something bigger than yourself. The AI spoke again. Mrs. Stone, I should inform you that the enhancement process is extremely painful. Subjects experience complete cellular reconstruction over a period of 6 hours. Many do not survive the first hour. Margaret picked up one of the vials. It was warm to the touch and the liquid inside seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. If I do this, she said, will I still be me? Jacob was still Jacob, Harper said. Enhanced, but still the man you married. The process changes your body, not your soul. Outside, somewhere far above them, Margaret could hear the wind blowing across Dry Creek. Up there, 11 people were going about their daily lives, not knowing that their world was about to change forever. Betty was probably tending to someone's aches and pains. Pete was working in the greenhouse. Tom was keeping the power running. They were counting on her to protect them even if they did not know it yet. Margaret looked at Harper, then at the vial in her hands. "How long do we have before the Zephyrians arrive?" "Maybe 2 days," Harper said. "Maybe less." Margaret nodded and walked toward the enhancement chamber that stood in the center of the room. "Then we better get started." The enhancement chamber looked like a medical bed surrounded by machines. Tubes and wires connected to monitors that would track every part of the process. Margaret lay down on the cold metal surface while Harper and the AI prepared the equipment. "Last chance to change your mind," Harper said, holding the syringe filled with blue liquid. Margaret thought about Jacob, about the 11 people still living in Dry Creek, about the Zephyrian ships that were coming to destroy everything she cared about. "Do it," she said. The needle went into her arm. The serum felt cold at first, then hot, then like fire racing through her veins. Margaret tried to stay calm, but within minutes the pain became worse than anything she had ever felt. Her body felt like it was being torn apart and rebuilt at the same time. "Cellular reconstruction beginning," the AI announced. Heart rate elevated, brain activity increasing, genetic markers responding. Margaret screamed. She could not help it. The pain was everywhere, in her bones, her muscles, her blood. She felt her body changing, growing stronger but at a terrible cost. Harper held her hand while she convulsed on the table. "Fight through it," Harper said. "Jacob made it through. You can too." Hours passed. Margaret drifted in and out of consciousness, her body rebuilding itself according to the genetic template the serum carried. She saw visions of Jacob's memories, felt echoes of his experiences. She understood now what he had gone through, what he had become. When she finally woke up, everything was different. Her vision was sharper, able to see details across the room that should have been impossible to make out. Her hearing picked up sounds from far above, the voices of people in Dry Creek going about their daily business. Her body felt strong, stronger than it had ever been. "How do you feel?" Harper asked. Margaret sat up easily, no longer tired or weak. "Different, but still me." She stood and walked to a mirror on the wall. She looked the same, but her eyes seemed brighter, more alert. When she moved, it felt like floating rather than walking. "Enhancement successful," the AI said. "All systems functioning within optimal parameters. Welcome to Genesis Protocol, Mrs. Stone." Harper showed her how to interface with the facility's computer systems. Her enhanced mind could process information faster than before, understanding complex data streams that would have taken hours to read through. She learned about the orbital defense platforms hidden around New Arizona, weapons that had been dormant for years. "These platforms were Jacob's backup plan," Harper said. "If the colony was ever threatened, he could activate them remotely. But only someone with enhancement could handle the mental load of controlling multiple weapon systems." Margaret connected her mind to the defense network. Suddenly she could see everything. Satellites showed her the entire planet from space. Sensors detected ships moving through the outer system. And there, approaching fast, was the Zephyrian fleet. "They're already here," Margaret said, her voice calm despite the terrible news. 15 ships, maybe more. They'll be in orbit within 6 hours. Harper ran to the communications console and started sending signals to Earth Command, trying to get word out about the approaching attack. But space was full of interference and the messages were not getting through. "We're on our own," Harper said. Margaret was still connected to the defense network, watching the alien ships grow larger on the sensors. She could see their bio-organic hulls, grown rather than built, pulsing with their own life. Inside those ships were thousands of Zephyrian soldiers, creatures that looked like giant insects with weapons for arms. "How many people are left in Dry Creek?" Margaret asked. 11, counting us, Harper said. "Get them to the shelter under the medical station. Betty knows where it is." Margaret began activating the orbital platforms one by one. Each weapon system came online with a soft hum of power. She felt them like extensions of her own body, ready to strike at her command. The first Zephyrian ships entered orbit as the sun set over Dry Creek. Margaret watched through the sensors as they began scanning the planet's surface, looking for the Genesis facility. They knew it was here somewhere, but the exact location was hidden. "They're starting their search pattern," Margaret said. "It won't take them long to find us." Harper was loading weapons, preparing for ground combat. "The platforms can handle their ships, but some of them will get troops to the surface." Margaret nodded, still watching the alien fleet through her enhanced senses. She could feel their hunger, their desire to consume and destroy. The Zephyrians did not just want to defeat humanity, they wanted to erase them completely. The first platform fired, sending a beam of pure energy across space to strike a Zephyrian ship. The alien vessel exploded in a flash of green fire, but the others immediately began evasive maneuvers. "Direct hit," Margaret said, "but they're adapting fast." More beams lanced out from the hidden platforms. 2 more ships died, but the rest spread out across the sky, making themselves harder targets. Some began firing back, their bioweapons, sending streams of acid toward the planet's surface. Margaret felt every hit like a punch to her body. The platforms were part of her now, connected through the enhancement process. When they took damage, she felt pain. But she kept firing, picking off alien ships one by one. 8 ships down, she reported, 7 still active. The remaining Zephyrian vessels changed tactics. Instead of staying in orbit, they dove toward the planet's surface, using the atmosphere to shield them from the orbital platforms. Margaret tried to track them, but they moved too fast and too low. "They're coming down," she said. "Landing parties inbound." Harper grabbed his rifle and headed for the ladder. "I'll hold them off as long as I can." Margaret disconnected from the defense network and followed him. Her enhanced body moved with impossible speed and grace, taking the ladder rungs 3 at a time. By the time they reached the trading post, she could hear the sound of alien ships landing nearby. Through the windows, she saw lights in the sky. Not the clean light of human technology, but the sickly green glow of Zephyrian bioships. The enemy had arrived and the real battle was about to begin. Margaret checked Jacob's pistol and found it felt different in her enhanced hands. Lighter, easier to control. She could see exactly where each shot would go before she pulled the eye trigger. "How many of them?" Harper asked. Margaret listened with her enhanced hearing. She could detect movement, breathing, the scrape of claws on rock. "Lots of movement." "Too many," she said. "But we'll make them pay for every step." The first Zephyrian soldiers came through the dust like nightmares made real. They stood 8 feet tall with 4 arms ending in razor claws. Their exoskeletons gleamed black in the moonlight, and acid dripped from their mouths as they searched for human prey. Margaret moved faster than she had ever thought possible. Her enhanced reflexes let her see the aliens as if they were moving through thick water. She put 3 bullets into the first creature's head before it could even turn toward her. The second one lasted long enough to raise its claws before Jacob's pistol spoke again. Harper fought beside her with his military rifle, but he was just a normal human facing creatures designed to kill. A Zephyrian got close enough to slash at him with its claws, tearing through his jacket and drawing blood. "Get to the shelter," Margaret told him. "Protect the others." "I'm not leaving you," Harper said, firing at another alien. "That's an order," Margaret said, and something in her voice made Harper obey. More Zephyrians poured into Dry Creek. Margaret counted at least 30, maybe more. They spread out between the buildings, hunting for the humans they could smell hiding nearby. Margaret heard Betty screaming from the direction of the medical station and knew the shelter had been found. She ran toward the sound, moving so fast that the aliens could barely track her movement. Her enhanced body carried her across the main street in 3 long bounds. She landed in front of the medical station just as a group of Zephyrians broke down the door. The creatures had found the shelter entrance. Pete and Tom were trying to hold them back with hunting rifles, but the bullets barely scratched the alien armor. Margaret saw one of the Zephyrians grab old Pete with two of its arms and lift him off the ground. Margaret's first shot took the creature's head clean off. Pete dropped to the floor, alive but shaken. The other aliens turned toward this new threat, hissing with voices that sounded like breaking glass. She moved through them like death itself. Every shot found its target. Every step took her exactly where she needed to be. The enhancement process had made her more than human, and for the first time she understood what Jacob must have felt during his last battle. But there were too many of them. For every alien she killed, two more appeared. Her ammunition was running low and more Zephyrian ships were landing outside the settlement. Margaret made a choice that would have terrified her old self. She ran back to the trading post and down the ladder to Genesis Station. The facility's computer systems were still active, still connected to weapons she had not used yet. "Helen," she called to the AI. "Show me the self-destruct sequence." "Mrs. Stone, activation of the nuclear self-destruct will destroy everything within 50 miles. This includes the settlement and all human life in the area." "I know," Margaret said. "How long until detonation after activation?" 10 minutes, the AI said. "Are you certain you wish to proceed?" Margaret looked at the screens showing Zephyrian forces spreading across the surface. Their ships were scattered across a wide area, but most of them were close enough to Dry Creek to be caught in the blast. If she could destroy the fleet, other human colonies in the sector might have a chance. "Start the countdown," she said. The facility's lights changed from white to red. Alarms began sounding throughout the underground complex. Margaret ran back up the ladder, knowing she had 10 minutes to save as many people as possible. She found Harper and the others still fighting in the medical station. The shelter had held, but barely. Several of the colonists were wounded and ammunition was almost gone. "Everyone out," Margaret shouted. "Move toward the landing pad on the north side of town." "What about the aliens?" Betty asked. "I'll handle them," Margaret said. She led the group through the back streets of Dry Creek, avoiding the main concentrations of Zephyrian forces. Her enhanced hearing let her track the aliens' movements, finding safe paths through the maze of buildings. At the landing pad, Harper's crashed ship sat damaged but not completely destroyed. Tom looked at the engines and shook his head. "It'll never fly," he said. "It doesn't need to fly far," Harper said. "Just far enough." They worked together to get the ship's systems running. Margaret stood guard, picking off any Zephyrians that got too close. She was down to her last few bullets, but her enhanced speed and strength were enough to kill the aliens with her bare hands when necessary. 5 minutes, Margaret called out, checking the countdown in her enhanced mind. The ship's engines coughed to life. Harper got everyone aboard while Margaret held the boarding ramp. 3 more Zephyrians charged toward them, and she met them head-on. Her fists, strengthened by the enhancement process, punched through their armor like it was made of paper. "Margaret, come on!" Harper shouted from the pilot's seat. She ran up the ramp as the ship lifted off. Through the windows she could see Zephyrian ships all across the landscape, their crews unaware of what was coming. 2 minutes, she said. The ship cleared the atmosphere just as the countdown reached 0. Behind them, Genesis Station's nuclear core went critical. The explosion turned night into day, a miniature sun that consumed everything within 50 miles. Zephyrian ships, alien soldiers, and the empty buildings of Dry Creek all disappeared in the white-hot fire. The blast wave caught Harper's ship and threw it across space, but the little craft held together. When the light faded, Margaret looked back at where her home had been. Nothing remained but a crater filled with molten glass. "It's done," she said quietly. Harper set course for the nearest Earth command base. In the cargo hold, he carried data cores containing all the Genesis research. The enhancement technology would live on, helping humanity fight back against the alien threat. Months later, enhanced human soldiers began turning the tide of the war. New colonies were built, stronger than before. The Outer Rim was no longer abandoned territory. Margaret Stone became a legend, the widow who sacrificed everything to save humanity's future. But she never forgot the price of victory. 11 people had called Dry Creek home, and now only they remained to remember it. In the rebuilt settlement that rose where Dry Creek had been, They put up a monument with two names: Jacob Stone, who died protecting hope; Margaret Stone, who gave that hope wings. The inscription read simply, "They were only human, but human was enough."